Sorry, this is taking a minute more than.
نعتذر لأن الوقت
Okay. مرحبا جميعا. Hello everybody. أرحب بالجميع الحضور وبمحدثنا الكريم.
All and our distinguished speaker on behalf of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies and the Doha Institute. My name is Ahmad Mansour. I lecture here at the Doha Institute and a researcher at the Strategic Unit at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies.
Mansour, I'm assistant professor in the department or in the program of critical security studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. And I'm also a researcher for the Strategic Studies Unit at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. And on behalf of those two institutions, I would like to welcome you to today's talk. I would like to make an announcement really to our audience on social media and also present here. I welcome the audience, people on Zoom and other really social media platforms are really welcome to send their queries and questions and interventions, and we will attend to them as they come. If you would like to hear us either in Arabic or in English, إذا أردتم السماع أو الاستماع لنا باللغة.
If you want to listen to in English or Arabic, there will be interpretation. There will be interpretation, simultaneous interpretation. You can use wherever you are. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
A friend, an old friend in the important really sense, and an established diplomat and scholar. Dr. Talmiz Ahmad, welcome on board. Dr. Ahmad joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1974 and was posted to Kuwait, Iraq, and Yemen, then as consul also general in Jeddah in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Then he became ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the UAE. Afterwards, and in between those positions, he held global appointments in New York, London, Pretoria, and he became the head of the Gulf and the Hajj division in the Ministry of External Affairs in 1998-2000. And as I said, he held other really distinguished positions in his career. Now he put on his academic and scholarly hat. He holds the Ram Southey Chair for International Studies at Symbiosis International University in Pune, India. He has authored 3 books on West Asian politics and writes and lectures regularly on political Islam, West Asia, Eurasia, and the Indian Ocean, and energy security. His latest book, congratulations on the book, West Asia at War. It's a very catchy title. And I welcome him in our midst. And I open up the floor, Dr. Ahmad, to share your thoughts, to introduce your topic and to introduce yourself. And I apologize if I missed really anything in that. And we look forward to engaging your ideas and thoughts in this hour and a half. Thank you, and the floor is to you.
Thank you very much, Ahmad. I'm delighted to be addressing an audience from the Gulf. And it is a region very close to my heart. I have spent very large part of my professional career in the region. And after I retired, I stayed on in the region for many more years. And hence, if there is one region with which I have some familiarity, also very deep personal affection, it is the region of the Gulf. As you are aware, I have traveled very extensively throughout the region, and in fact, most parts of West Asia and North Africa. And I have lived in many other places as well. So it is what I will present to you is a personal understanding of what is happening in the region, what are the dynamics of these events, what are their implications, and where are we likely to go. And I have also looked, because I'm sitting in New Delhi, I have also looked at the implications of this for India as well. So let me put up a PowerPoint presentation, and then I am with you all the way. The PowerPoint is up. I hope all of you can see it. You're able to see it. Now, the first thing that I should explain to you is why am I talking about India's Western neighborhood and not about West Asia? And the reason is very clear from the first sentence of my presentation, that the early period when we could look at the dynamics of different regions separately no longer obtains. If I can say very clearly to you and very frankly, the security scenario relating to South Asia, the Gulf, West Asia, North Africa, the Red Sea, and the East Mediterranean is now one integrated security landscape. All that is happening in the region is impacting on other countries. There is a direct involvement of regional players in each other's politics. We cannot discuss, for example, Afghanistan without bringing in the role of Gulf countries. Pakistan indeed has been a very integral part of West Asian affairs and remains to this day. Iran obviously has fingerprints all across the region in Pakistan, Afghanistan, as also in Syria. Turkey is a major role player today all across the region as well, not just engaged today with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, and Libya, but also active in the East Mediterranean. The UAE, obviously, we are aware, has its footprints all across Yemen, also in the Horn of Africa, and in Libya as well. I think the case is very clear that this is one integrated security landscape. But what are we now looking at? We are looking at a region that is experiencing extraordinary uncertainty for various reasons. Firstly, none of us is able to figure out what the Americans are doing. They used to be a very distinctive presence in the region for the last 50 years. They have intervened in several events pertaining to the region. They have created large-scale destruction and havoc across the region. They maintain even today very substantial armed forces in the region. But we are today unable to figure out where they are going. What is it all about? What is their policy all about? We are told from Washington that the president is disengaged from the region. But we also know, living in the region, that the United States no longer has the credibility as a security provider that it might have had earlier. You have also seen that there are new players who have emerged in the region, whose presence we might not have experienced some years ago. Both China and Russia are today a significant presence in the region. Not comparable to the Americans so far, but they have engaged substantially with the principal role players within the region. Their relationship is economic, logistical, political, diplomatic as well. As I speak to you, the region's affairs are also being impacted on by events taking place not so far away in Ukraine. Ukraine has the ability, the potential to really change a lot that is happening within the region. What does all this mean for us? Firstly, the region itself is reviewing its existing relationships. Many of the alignments that had been in place for several decades are today being questioned. Just as an example, not a single country of West Asia supported, except for Kuwait, for obvious reasons, not a single country of West Asia supported the Americans on Ukraine or participated in any sanctions on the Americans. There is another aspect that is agitating the region, and that is the need to prepare first psychologically, then in terms of policy, and finally in terms of real changes on the ground for a post-hydrocarbon future. There is a lot of talk about this, and I think an attempt is being made to effect psychological changes, though real change has not yet become visible. And then you have, possibly reflecting the trend in favor of multipolarity in global affairs, the emerging role of, I have used the loose word, middle powers, powers that are today seeking a space and a role for themselves within the region. In the regional players themselves, obviously, are Iran, Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. But you have today, as I will elaborate later, Qatar and UAE are also significant role players in the region, far more important than they might have been earlier. Israel today, it would appear, is taking the first steps, the baby steps, to accept the idea that it is an integral part of West Asia. For far too long, the Israelis felt that they were a Western country, that they were the bastion of the West at the edge of West Asia, and that their security was entirely dependent on the relationship they had with the Americans. But instead of they depending on the Americans, they actually dominated American affairs as far as its approach to West Asia was concerned. Today, it would seem not yet clear, but I am reading a potential value that the normalization that has occurred in regard to the diplomatic ties with certain Arab countries could create the psyche within Israel, particularly among younger people, that we are an integral part of West Asia, and this is where we belong. And if we have to be concerned about Israel's security, we have to deal with the neighbors who are right in front of us, rather than look over our shoulder beyond the Atlantic, beyond the Mediterranean, beyond the Atlantic to Washington, D.C. You now also have three new players. Their role is not clear as yet. I am naming them because their role could be. It is not yet shaped, and there are no clear policy documents coming from them. But I would like to flag the possible role in this region of three players: India, with which we are all familiar because it has been engaged with the region for several centuries, but two new players, France and Japan. Let me look at this Western neighborhood of India in some greater detail. First, let me start with Pakistan. I have deliberately illustrated my remarks with certain maps. The first map that you see in front of you on the left shows British India. And when you look at British India, you can spot certain geopolitical features. India at that time shared a border with Afghanistan, shared a border with the USSR, which later became Central Asia, had a small border with China in Xinjiang, but its principal border was with Tibet. All of that changed because two events took place on 14-15 August 1947. It was the independence of India and the partition of India. The map relating to the partition of India in front of you shows certain very significant geopolitical developments. India no longer shares a border with Afghanistan and Iran or with Central Asia. Separately, not connected with partition, in 1951, China occupies Tibet. Therefore, from 1951, the newly independent country shares a very long border with China. And you have then the war with Pakistan. Within a few months of our independence, we were already at war. We were at war with both nations claiming the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir did not accede to India in August. Therefore, it was not a part of the map of India when we got independent. It acceded only in the month of October. But by that time, a large part of that state was under Pakistani occupation. And that situation remains to this day. It is important to highlight these points, not because of the geopolitical implications that they have for India and its role in the region, but also the ideological and psychological implications. The ideological implication is straightforward. Pakistan joined the Western Alliance in the Cold War and therefore brought the Cold War to the Indian doorstep. Pakistan was actively supported by the Western Alliance with weaponry and hence engaged with India in conventional war in 1965 and 1971. No major changes took place as a result of these wars, but something else happened. This divide between India and Pakistan is fundamental to the identity of the two countries. Pakistan believes that its vision of a Muslim homeland is incomplete so long as the state of Jammu and Kashmir, a Muslim majority province, is not a part of Pakistan. And India believes the exact opposite, that the state of Jammu and Kashmir, a Muslim majority area, being an integral part of India, affirms our commitment to a democratic and secular order. And hence, the quarrel over Jammu and Kashmir goes well beyond territory, well beyond geopolitics, and has come to define the quest for nationhood in the two countries, and it remains to this day. After the defeat of Pakistan in 1971, Pakistan's military leaders and possibly political leaders as well opted to reorganize their struggle with India. They took the help and they were facilitated in this project because of their long involvement with the global jihad in Afghanistan, a state-sponsored jihad of United States, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, where not just the Afghans were empowered to fight the intruder, but every Muslim in the world was encouraged to come to the Pak-Afghan border and participate in this state-sponsored jihad. Islam therefore became a principal instrument in the hands of Pakistan to pursue its agenda in the region. As far as Afghanistan is concerned, they supported initially the jihad of the global jihad, the Mujahideen struggle, and after that, they supported the Taliban. But as the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan, you find that the Pakistanis, utilizing a large part of the resources provided to them to support the Afghan struggle, they diverted and initiated a jihad against India. Initially in Jammu and Kashmir, and later on spreading to the other part of the country. You find there were periodic elements to bring about a sort of understanding, but very little actually helped. And there are arguments that there is a vested interest, possibly on both sides, a vested interest to ensure the war scenario continuing. In the case of Pakistan, very obviously, it empowers the armed forces and gives them a political role in the country, which they might not have otherwise been able to claim. In the case of India, the argument is more tenuous, but it is suggested that there are vested interests enjoying certain economic advantages as a result of resources available to fight extremism. Pakistan today, while it flourished for far too long as an ally of the United States, supporting US agenda in Afghanistan, today finds itself, following the US withdrawal, that some of the suspicions relating to Pakistan's role in encouraging the Taliban has now been exposed, and the Americans are less enthusiastic about their relationship with Pakistan. And Pakistan has turned to China. Looking at this relationship from the Indian perspective, obviously we are very deeply concerned, not just because we have an issue with Pakistan, we also have a border issue with China, and the nexus of these two coming together poses a very serious threat to India's interests. Look at the next theater on our frontier, and this is Afghanistan. Again, look at the border. When we go back to British India, Afghanistan was created as a buffer state. Recall here, it is the British who gave the lines that today constitute modern Afghanistan, the Durand Line, which separated Afghanistan from Russia, and the later lines which separated Afghanistan from Iran. And then you had the Durand Line later shaped to separate British India from Afghanistan as well. This entity, whose border is exactly as it is today, had a narrow strip of territory that separated British India from the Soviet Union. Today it is with Pakistan. And also because Pakistan occupies a third of Jammu and Kashmir, India obviously has no border with Afghanistan at all. But Afghanistan, when there was you could say, a competition for influence in Afghanistan. Initially, the Afghan leadership of King Zahir Shah were pro-India. They were comfortable with India because Pakistan claimed had certain territorial concerns. When the Durand Line was created, the Pathan people or the Pakhtun people were divided between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And there has been a consistent movement on both sides to come together. And if you were sitting in Islamabad, this would be a matter of deep concern for you. Pakistan established its role in Afghanistan following the Soviet occupation and its own involvement in the global jihad. Therefore, India was elbowed out. India was opposed to the global jihad. India opposed the use of faith for political purposes and was therefore more inclined in favor of Iran and the Soviet Union. But the scenario after the Cold War remained equally complicated because not just that you had the Pakistanis dominating Afghan affairs and manipulating government formation in Afghanistan, you also find that they played a significant role in the emergence of the Taliban. Taliban are not exactly the same kind of jihadis in terms of ideology and background as Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. They are today, scholars say, they are conservative. They are not the progeny of Sayyid Qutb and scholars of that line and culminating with Ayman Zawahiri. They are much more from the traditions of Islam within South Asia, which is quite diverse. But having said that, they remained under Pakistani influence, and you find that the kind of rule they had for a short period in their emirate won them the odium of the international community. As their nexus with Al-Qaeda led to the attack of 9/11 and the destruction of the emirate, you find that the scenario became even more complicated. Today, it is well documented that Pakistan played a central role in the re-emergence and empowerment of the Taliban and their final victory over the Americans just a short while ago in August last year. Therefore, once again, scholars have pointed out that it is the graveyard of empires, the British, the Soviet, and now the Americans. But none of us, now the Americans have gone and Taliban are theoretically ruling from Kabul, none of us seems to know how to handle that country. None of us has any diplomatic ties with that country. I don't know what we are waiting for. The Americans have washed their hands of the country. Pakistan, what has been exposed over the last several months is 2 points. Number one, during the Taliban struggle, the Taliban presented a very unified identity. Today, we know that they are actually a very large number of separate groups, separate influence groups, some of them militant, some of them diplomats, etc. The kind of people who negotiated the US withdrawal in Qatar were quite different from those who are actually ruling the country today. This leads us to the second reality relating to Afghanistan, and that is the fact that Pakistan does not any longer give the impression of being in control. Possibly there is a new book which has come from the Dutch scholar Betty Dam, who argues that Pakistani's role in managing Taliban was always exaggerated. But today it appears they don't seem to be role players whatsoever. Pakistan itself does not know how to handle the Taliban. We do not know. There was an impression a short while ago that the ISI had helped to put together the government. But today you find Pakistan floundering. Where are we to go? My own view is that India should not turn its back to Afghanistan. Yes, we have a lot of concerns about the Taliban, but unless the neighbors deal with the Taliban, how are they going to hear what we have to say? And the likelihood of failure is always there, but we should not give up the attempt to engage with these people. And I therefore very strongly advocate that both intelligence and diplomatic overtures should be made to the Taliban, possibly facilitated by Qatar. Qatar has a certain role in the Taliban, is very familiar with many of the leaders. They are also very dependent. Some of them are dependent on the patronage extended to them earlier. So I believe that given the kind of close relationship India has with Qatar, we must initiate now the process of engagement. I have put down over here, should it be isolated or should we be a little patient? I believe neither of them is an option. If we stay on the sidelines, if I was sitting in Delhi, I would be concerned with what the Russians and the Chinese are doing. I'm not saying that their role is necessarily negative or harmful to us, but I believe India has a very major stake in what is happening in Afghanistan, and we should be actually there behind the scenes, engaged with them, conveying our concerns, and possibly addressing some of the things they need. We have already provided them with a huge consignment of wheat, but I think we should do more. Iran, I have given the title of my slide, All Promise, No Substance. Every time there is a discussion relating to Iran, they will speak of the civilizational connectivity. The civilizational connectivity goes back several centuries, and none of us is required to sit and elaborate it. But all of us who are students of international affairs know that civilizational connectivity can be a basis for present-day relations, but there is no substitute for present-day engagements. We have, from India's perspective, we have consistently subordinated our relations with Iran to what is happening in terms of our ties with the United States. The high point of our relationship was the visit of President Khatami in 2003. A strategic partnership agreement was signed. We had a New Delhi declaration, and we truly believed at that time that we were looking at a relationship that would encompass security, defense, intelligence, economic, and logistical connectivity projects. None of that happened. 2003, all those years ago, 19 years ago, none of this has happened. Why? Because from 2004 onwards, we began to deal with the Americans with regard to the nuclear agreement. So that nuclear agreement, and obviously there is visceral hostility for Iran, the relationship that India was looking at with Iran was totally abrogated, and we went on with the American relationship. Again, we find a little later, after a few ups and downs, We had started engaging with the Iranians after the JCPOA, but the arrival of Donald Trump and the reinstatement of sanctions once again brought our relationship to rock bottom, to the extent that India's import from Iran became zero. Now, when I look at the relationship, there was so much promise, but actually nothing happened. In 2003, Iran promised that India would develop the Chabahar port in the Gulf of Oman and would have connectivity projects with regard to Afghanistan, Central Asia, and Russia. This was reiterated in 2016 when Prime Minister Modi went to Tehran and Afghan President Ashraf Ghani arrived and joined them, and there was a tripartite meeting to reiterate these projects. I tell Indian audiences that in 2003 we had Iranian support for major logistical projects, and if we had pursued them, we would have had in place major south-north connectivity projects 10 years before Xi Jinping talked about the Belt and Road Initiative. If today Belt and Road Initiative is going forward so robustly and is causing so much anxiety in Delhi, it is not the fault of Beijing. It is something that we should have done far better on our own. The handling of the relations, the acceptance in Delhi that you have to be a total subordinate of the Americans if you want to have any kind of relationship with them is, I think, untested. No Indian ever conveyed to the Americans that we too have strategic interests in terms of our relationship. You have your own problems with Iran, overwhelmingly connected with your domestic situation. We don't have those problems with Iran. Iran is our strategic partner. It is a significant presence in our neighborhood. But this was never conveyed, and blindly and automatically we went along with the sanctions that the Americans insisted should be our sanctions as well. Things might be changing. It's a very, very early period. There has been, if you look at the Iranians, they say that we are all right. I know they've taken a hard hit with regard to due to the sanctions, and but they suggest that they are coming out of that they have built domestic capacities which will see them through, and that in terms of their political influence, there has been no significant dilution. On the other hand, even as the Americans spent 20 years in Iraq, it is the Iranians that appear to have done rather well for themselves in that country. So you have an Iranian outreach, Iraq, and then Syria and Lebanon as well. And also you have them engaged with Hamas. Today you have another picture coming. The Saudis are already talking to the Iranians. We are told at intelligence level, 5 meetings have taken place in Baghdad. We can only guess at what they are talking about. I think the Saudis want a lot of assistance in handling the problems in Yemen and bringing the Houthis to the negotiating table. To what extent Iran can contribute to this remains doubtful, because the whole basis for the Saudi involvement with Yemen was, to my mind, flawed. The Saudi approach to the region was to see it entirely, underline entirely, through the prism of sectarian identity, and to automatically believe, therefore, that whatever shade of Shia you were allied with Iran. And all of us who have studied the narratives relating to Yemen know full well that this is untrue as far as Yemen is concerned. The Houthis at that stage, the Zaydis who follow the first 5 Imams, do have very little in common doctrinally, politically, and at that time militarily with Iran. Iran's capacity to deliver today is, I think, fairly limited. And the Houthi leadership, having survived so many years of conflict, 7 years of conflict, and into the 8th year, and having taken more than 100,000 deaths, today seem much less accommodative. They are conveying very clearly the message that if you want peace in this region, A, you have to talk to us, and B, you have to accommodate us in the countries political and economic scenario. Other countries of the region have also started talking to Iran, which way it will go. At first, I had thought that they will become much more active because they were all waiting for the JCPOA. JCPOA appears to be now very much on the back burner, and hence, if we have to engage with Iran today, we would need to do that without the JCPOA being on the table. All of you are familiar with India's ties with West Asia. I therefore a presentation that would take 20 slides from me. I have put it down to only to one slide. We have had a historic relationship. Our relationship is based on our links with energy, regard trade and investment, logistical connectivity, and community. Energy, we import the bulk of our energy requirements from the region. The region is a major trade partner and possibly the number one export destination. It has emerged as a very major investment source for our country, and it has 8.5 million people, the number one expatriate community in every country of the GCC that remits to India about $35 billion. I have put logistical connectivity because it has not been removed from the table, and that the idea that India will develop Chabahar and then go on to build links with Afghanistan and Central Asia and possibly Russia has not been given up officially. It is still there on the table. Mr. Modi made a very robust engagement with the region from 2015 onwards up to 2019, and every agreement lifted the relationship further. So that today we have very strong institutionalized platforms for bilateral dialogue. And we have gone from the conventional areas mentioned in my first sentence, we are looking at frontier areas of the high technology in different things. We also have learned a lot from the pandemic, and we have realized the value of being close to each other and to bring onto the table the various strengths that each side has. In our case, human resources, and on the Gulf side, a deep desire to expand the technological base of the people and of the country as such. Israel also has been an Indian partner, both with regard to defense and technology. And we are also, there is a loose talk, but very little realized so far, of a trilateral relationship between UAE, India, and Israel after the normalizations. But the region is in a state of uncertainty. Firstly, Trump himself contributed a lot by building these battle lines and promoting confrontation in the region. United States, Iran, Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, confronting Iran and its allies right up to Syria. That was the one thing. And you were constantly worried that a small skirmish in the Gulf or in the Gulf of Oman would lead to a very major region-wide conflagration. American approach was absolutely mindless, but at the same time extremely provocative. You found all the time they were doing certain provocative actions, giving the impression that there are lobbies within the United States anxiously provoking the president, who applied his mind in a very limited way, provoking him to get into war. And he had this macho strut in the region, saying, what a tough guy I am. I assassinated Qasem Soleimani, not realizing how close he took the entire region to conflict. The region throughout this period and the 1 year of Biden appeared to be, at the end of the day, a very deeply disappointed with the US leadership. And as you end that period, you found the region now looking at seeing how they could build their own independent engagements. But the point that I have to make, and this is what I have made frequently at public fora, is that India, sadly, is not in the picture with regard to these very significant developments taking place in the region. I have argued from 2012 onwards and possibly earlier that India should be part of the process of confidence building in the region from 2012. So it's 10 years now. I have written academic papers on the subject as well. But I truly believe that Prime Minister Modi's engagements with the region were going to be transformative. But to my mind, none of that has happened. And the principles on which India shaped its engagement with the region, and that is transactional and bilateral, that remains to this day. So India has a wide variety of relationships. Each of them is on bilateral basis and each of them is transactional, and one relationship does not impinge on the other. I have argued and I believe that this is a luxury that is no longer available in the changed circumstances in the region. And that in the region, you need security providers. I don't mean militarily, because the region doesn't need more military forces. You need diplomatic credible diplomatic initiative. As the Americans now indicate they want to disengage from the region, and as we see that the American credibility is low, the need to shape alternative arrangements through alternative initiatives, to my mind, remains very important, but it is something that I have seen no evidence of so far.
Just to note, I want to highlight to our audience that they can send us their questions in English and Arabic, if you don't mind, and to also highlight that we're into the talk and we're looking forward to the engagement. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just a little bit more. New challenges. So Biden, he emerged, his presidency started with hostility to Saudi Arabia, used some language which could have been avoided, also showed a certain distance from Turkey, initially unfriendly with Netanyahu, but as like all American presidents, sucked into the Israel lobby. And now they talks about disengagement. So as I have said already, United States appears to be a very low, seems to have very low credibility as a regional security provider. What does the region look like as I speak to you? Saudis and Iranians are talking to each other. Turkey has reached out to Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE and is hinting at accommodativeness in Libya. Iraq, Jordan, and Egypt announced low-key, but an economic and political alignment with each other. UAE is extremely active in Yemen, the Red Sea, and in the Horn of Africa, though I'm not clear what their strategic purpose is. Saudi Arabia has taken control of the Al-Mahara province on the border, Yemeni province on the border with Oman, and is looking at setting out a pipeline that would go from the eastern province directly to the Indian Ocean. The JCPOA, for all practical purposes, is of very little significance. For the Iranians, I think their assessment is very clear that even if there is a JCPOA today, and even if they make the concessions demanded of them, it is very unlikely that it is going to survive another year, and certainly not even 2 years. If the Biden presidency is looking at lame duck status by the end of November, it's going to be a non-functional administration, and who knows who will come into the White House 2 years later. Israel has been provocative. As a consequence of the normalization agreements, there is, on the one hand, a certain engagement with Arab states, a kind of basically on Israeli terms, to get economic cooperation from the Emiratis, to have an air linkage with Casablanca and Rabat. Not much interest happening with regard to Sudan, which is in the throes of an inconvenience. But I have argued, and I continue to argue, that over the longer time, as young Israeli people engage more and more with the Arabs, they are seeing an Arab community that is well educated, self-confident, professionally qualified, living in cities that are better than most European cities. And they will ask themselves, What is all our quarrel about? That is when they will start looking, possibly the next generation, start looking at shifting away from the stranglehold of faith that has got the stranglehold that faith has on their politics, and possibly, just possibly, think of new ideas. I have put a slide for you for Ukraine. I won't go into it in detail because very often this is the point is that the Ukraine war has accelerated within the region a kind of independence of action. And I have called it the coming of age. West Asia has come of age in terms of its diplomatic initiative, and it is now believes that it can define its own interests, it can pursue its own interests, and it can have diplomatic engagements from a position of self-confidence. Where does this leave India? Very quickly. US, firstly, the certain realities, the obvious reality, the big picture. US seems to be, as of now, deeply estranged from Russia and China. There is no indication. Earlier, there was indications that the Cold Warriors in Washington were trying to separate Russia from China, strangle Russia, and then either co-opt China as in the Cold War or confront China on its own. What we are seeing instead is that there is now, this has been going on for 15 or 20 years, the steady strengthening of bilateral relations and steady cooperation of these two countries all across Eurasia, and the outreach within our region to Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. I would say to you that there is an order emerging, and this order will emerge on the basis of a certain alignment taking place in Eurasia. It is not going to be a binary alignment, which is what the Cold Warriors would talk about. US hegemony, debilitating Russian capacity, and then confronting China. None of that. I believe it is a multipolar order that we are looking at, but we do not know. I will hold back on this because I don't know the outcome of the Ukraine war. But as of now, I would say that this is where we are looking, a multipolar order. I have already talked about the historical perspective relating to India. India used to be a very globally engaged country earlier, and it was also globally engaged all through the Cold War. There seems to be a certain concern a certain change with regard to how India sees the world. My own concern, and I have used very harsh language here, there appears to be a closing of the Indian mind. That which a country that was engaged internationally, both before colonialism and also after our independence through the NAM movement, is today looking more and more inward. India's priorities appear to be the reshaping of the domestic order. I also noted over a few years, and possibly if I put a date, it is 2010, that Indian elite started looking at China with a degree of discomfort. Possibly the assessment amongst them, informally, not structured, was to believe that China has gone too far ahead of us for us to be able to match this capacity, the political, military, and economic capacity. It is in this context that the outreach to the United States was accelerated and became something very obvious on the regional and global platform. I believe this was misconceived. And I say that very openly, this is misconceived. Neither did India need to have the kind of insecurity that it manifested with regard to China, nor was the embrace of the Americans the panacea that would have seen us through. We went in for the embrace of the Quad, and I have written an academic paper on this, as also an article arguing that the signals given by increasing Indian alignment with Quad possibly led the Chinese to give a very unpleasant signal to India, to remind India that we have a 4,000-kilometer undemarcated border, and India's crucial security concerns do not lie beyond Malacca in the South China Sea. They lie right here at the Indian border. I also would argue to you that I feel a degree of course correction is taking place. I think that the value attached to Quad earlier has now come down quite significantly, and it is no longer being projected in India as a security provider. I'm not saying we have diluted our relationship with the American, but what we have asserted is strategic autonomy. And I think this is where we are. I would end by saying that India needs a new strategic culture, that India has had for far too long. Its diplomacy has been bilateral and transactional. I believe we must build up the capacity to reach out and to shape our interests and to then pursue them robustly. For this, you need a grand vision, you need a strategy, and you need action plans. And I think this is when we were criticized nearly 30 years ago by an American commentator as not having a strategic vision, and that India's approach was short-term, ad hoc, reactive, and defensive. I have asked many members of our security establishment, is this not true today as well? Reactive, defensive, short-term, and ad hoc. And I am arguing to you, albeit you are a foreign audience, I am arguing to you that what India needs is a new strategic vision, a new strategic culture that gives us a vision that is long-term, enables us to harness national capacity for the purpose, pursue a diplomatic role which would bring in like-minded people on our behalf to our side, and give us the self-confidence that we urgently need to be role players in the new world order. Thank you very much.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Thank you so much for this very, very rich talk. Thank you so much. I wonder, I'm new to the technology looking. Dr. Ahmad, please. Dr. Ahmad, please.
First, thank you. Yes, Dr. Ahmad, yes, I was on mute, sorry. Thank you so much, Professor Ahmed, for this fascinating talk. You really gave a very comprehensive picture of the strategic, let's say, theater on multiple fronts and in depth. And thank you again for doing this in about half an hour. So that was very impressive. Yeah, slightly a bit more. But just to have, it's a very brief question, because you mentioned bullets to bullets, and I think we were more optimistic in the idea of transforming from war to peace.
Sorry, you are more optimistic about?
Transformations from conflict to non-conflict, if you can, or less conflict, if you wish, organized conflict in a way without using bullets in other peaceful means. But what you pictured more or less is we're likely more heading to either stalemates or further escalation. So if I can push you on that dimension and ask you if you give a bit of strategic forecasting. You mentioned the strategic vision, but since we need to know more about it, if you give some strategic forecasting on how the likelihood of conflict escalation, India and westwards, if you can elaborate a bit on that.
Yes, I have some thoughts on that, Dr. Omar Ashur. Just a question for both of you. Do you want me to take 2 or 3 questions and then respond to all of them one by one, or respond to the questions as they come to me? I will follow whatever you decide.
As you wish. You can start with this now, since
okay, I will start with this.
Please.
Yes. As you can imagine, our entire effort is to prevent war. I cannot imagine any development in our region that is more harmful than war. War destroys achievements of human beings. It destroys humankind. It destroys their society and their towns and their urban achievements. It destroys their livelihood. And I have never seen any major conflict achieving what the generals had started, politicians and generals had started out to do. Many of them talk about a short, sharp conflict, and that short, sharp conflict goes into 8 years and still no result. You have seen that in our own region, we have an ongoing conflict in Syria, in Yemen, and in Libya, and none of us knows where it has gone. But what we do know is that ordinary people have paid a very, very heavy price for this. Now, much of this conflict is a function of the region's sense of insecurity. The regional leaders sense a threat to their order, some of it domestic, some of it from external sources. So what you need fundamentally, I'm not talking about changing the domestic order because that is not my business. And as you know, India's persistent position has been we never interfere in the domestic affairs of other countries. But what I would say to you, therefore, is to build up initiatives which will boost confidence. The point number one, Saudi Arabia and Iran need to talk to each other, understand each other, not troubleshooting connected with Yemen, the larger issues that divide them. There are concerns in Saudi Arabia which are very legitimate. They have certain views with regard to Iran. Iran has certain concerns. Earlier, Iranian concerns were even more legitimate because the Americans and Israelis were there. Now, I would say to you that the situation is much better. If you were to have a coalition of Asian players, India, China, Japan, and Korea, dealing with this, having a special envoy, each of them, dealing with these countries quietly behind the scenes, building up platforms for self-confidence. I'm not talking about mediation because, as you know, India hates the word mediation. We are talking about promoting confidence and then bringing them together. You can do it either through track 1.5, you can do, so that you prepare certain grounds, certain norms, certain rules, which you can then apply to the government. So the first thing I would say, there are already discussions taking place. Syed Hussain Musavian and Dr. Abdul Aziz Sagar have actually produced 2 papers on this subject, one 2 years ago and one recently. Both of them are discussed in detail in my own book. I have also written a very detailed paper on how the principles of Westphalia give us the way forward. Now, after I have built self-confidence in the region, I have built confidence building measures in the region, I am actually looking at a region-wide cooperative security platform. You can never have security if on the basis of collective security. Collective security is contentious. It is confrontational. It is like what the Americans are shaping in Europe. They want long-term conflict. The alternative idea to this is what is called indivisible security. All are insecure if even one is insecure. Indivisible security, the moment I mention it, people start thinking that this is idealistic. No, I don't believe so. The Westphalia arrangement was an indivisible security initiative, brought all leading role players into the same platform, and gave security to Europe for about 100 years. The Concert of Europe was a similar initiative. I'm only illustrating them. I'm not saying that this is something that we can look at. Asia could not till recently pursue anything because you had the heavy hand of the Americans determining where we should go. And I'm not pretending to you they have packed up and gone. See, the problem which we are facing, and this is the root problem, and I'm discussing it with Western diplomats also, Americans still want Pax Americana. They do not recognize the world order has changed, that there are new players in the world, not just China and Russia. All of us are new players. Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia, India, Japan, France. All of us are seeing. None of us wants a binary. None of us wants their hegemony. What we want is respect for what we are interested in. And I therefore would like to pursue something like this. Now, I'm not so idealistic as to say that security concerns can go by the wayside, because then you are asking for trouble. We have some way to go. So you must have, firstly, I say my initiative is diplomatic and it is incremental. It is diplomatic and it is incremental, which means that I am not asking you to give up your present security concerns. But the fact that Saudi Arabia and Iran can sit together 5 times, I think that we should be able to accept that there are certain possibilities. So what I am saying is perhaps some more from papers and ideas from the region, sitting with people like us who wish the region well. There are many ideas already there. But I believe as the Russians, as the Americans now get out of the way, focus on Europe, focus on what is happening in the context of Ukraine, and involved in a European conflict. I would argue to you quite without fear of contradiction, Ukraine has nothing to do with us in Asia. The world that is being shaped by us will not be determined by Ukraine. It will be determined by what we do here. We need to deal with China. My argument to you is you can deal with China not bilaterally, because then the power is very asymmetrical. You can only deal with China in a collective format. And I put here from the Indian perspective, I have 3 formats. Number 1, RIC, Russia, India, China. It's a dialogue platform for 3 countries. We have not been able to meet because of the Ladakh issue. Number 2, BRICS. Number 3, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I'm open to new ideas. I have argued in my paper, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, set up nearly 30 years ago, now needs a revamp. Bring in security issues which we have eschewed up to now. So you need to deal with. The other day I was talking to an Australian. I said the biggest mistake you have made is to associate yourself with AUKUS. Because with the Americans, you can never have a relationship of equality. Please think of look at the map. Where is Australia located? Australia is an integral part of Southeast Asia. You are an Asian country. And you set up an Anglo-Saxon alliance with the British and the Americans, and you think your security has been guaranteed? Is this the way you look at security? You are deluded. You have to you are a dialogue partner with ASEAN. You have to deal with ASEAN and concern yourself with ASEAN, and from ASEAN, and from a position of strength, engage with China. You said, what about China? We had this legal agreement with regard to China's claim. I said, what legal agreement are you talking about? Has Israel ever accepted any legal agreement, legal pronouncement? Have the Americans ever accepted any legal pronouncement? Only when something suits you, you go running here and there. No, this is not a legal issue. It is a political issue. It has to be handled politically. If you confront China, the Chinese are likely to become more aggressive. So I think all of us need to look at our security with completely fresh eyes, with new alignments. And I believe we have that capacity. And what this business which India does, transactional and bilateral, I believe is day before yesterday's news. We need to talk to each other at multilateral forum. I'm not saying we should bring ministers and all in the picture. Let's talk as scholars. Let us talk 1 point. Okay, you don't want 1.5, bring track 2. Track 2, track 1.5. Let us go slowly. But can you are sitting in West Asia. Can you afford the kind of conflict you have in Yemen, Syria, and Libya and think that you are safe? A person, an Indian in Oman once asked me a few years ago, he said, Ambassador, tell me, are we safe here in Muscat? I said, can you be safe if your neighbor's house is burning? Pin drop silence. End of a beautiful dinner.
Excellent. Allow me to pose a couple of questions, if you don't mind, from the social media platforms. The first comes in English. Would you say that in order to engage positively with the Taliban in Afghanistan, their government should be recognized by India and other countries in the Gulf region? That's one.
Sorry, we should recognize the government. Is that what you said?
Yes. So would you say that in order to engage positively with the Taliban in Afghanistan, such as what you really proposed, should their government be recognized by India and by other countries in the Gulf?
Recognize diplomatic. Okay, I will respond.
Yes, that's one. Two, a second really question is how, it's in Arabic, so I'll translate. How can India become a geopolitical actor in West Asia, given the historic, cultural, and religious depth or really relations, meaning how can it bank on these? Can it really expand on these? Are there maybe hindrances in that field? And the third really question, if you don't mind, comes from me. I'm gonna really piggyback on that. And I want to ask you really specifically about Turkey. Turkey really recently in the naval exercises came out to say, you know, the president about Turkey wanting to be a naval really leader in the region. Turkey is sort of unencumbered in the same way that Iran is by sanctions and controls and all that. And it has really proven itself to be not only ambitious, but has the capabilities to act. So how do you, or what's the view from New Delhi or from Delhi, sorry, about how Turkey is acting and its size and future in West
Asia? With regard first to the Taliban, my suggestion is not, we don't start with recognition. Diplomatic ties is the culmination of the process of engagement, not the start of the process. Mm-hmm. What we need, we don't have any contact with them. We don't even know who their leaders are. We don't know what they are thinking. We don't know what they are planning. We don't know where they want to go with regard to their constitution. The only thing you heard, suddenly they came into the news was that they have announced the end of girls' education and they're insisting on hijab and niqab. That's what you have heard. From August last year up to now, this is all I know. I have no idea. What I am recommending, therefore, is the following. Number one, we must be engaged with. This is why you have behind-the-scenes diplomacy and you have intelligence. You have experts who deal with them. I have suggested these should be behind-the-scenes engagements, and I have argued that we can take the help of Qatar. We should talk to a wide variety of people. So Qatar can help us, Iran can help us, and Central Asian republics, particularly Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, can help us, and certainly Russia can be of use. So we should be able to first get a lot of information about what is happening. We don't have, we closed our embassy, so we don't have any presence in Afghanistan. Having identified the different factions, we should seek the help of our partners to see how we can engage with them. See what they want. What are they saying? Has anyone ever heard what they are saying? They don't, as far as I know, they don't have an economic policy or political policy or constitutional policy or social policy or anything. They don't know about whether there should be a federation, or what should be the role of tribal identity, what should be the nature of the armed forces, should there be a national army or a militia. All of these issues, by the way, countries have dealt with. I was posted in South Africa from 1994. I arrived there on 1st May 1994, and we grappled with the same issues there. Of course, they had extraordinary leaders like Nelson Mandela. You had an organized ANC, and you had extraordinary leaders like Thabo Mbeki and Cyril Ramaphosa, etc. Maybe they are hidden away somewhere and we don't know them. As far why I have such a negative view about Taliban is because I am looking at the Haqqani network. And I am told Haqqani network is a pretty dreadful bunch of people. I don't know. None of us has dealt with them. What are they thinking of in terms of government? It may happen that the first rounds will be very difficult, painful. They may say certain things which we may so dislike, we may pack up our bags and leave. You never give up. Long ago, I won't even name the person. He told me, he said, Mr. Ambassador, I don't need to use intelligence and diplomacy with my friends. I need them with people I don't agree with. And that's what we should be doing. I don't need to sit and talk with my friends and say how beautiful each of us looks. I need to sit with these guys we don't like, but I have to deal with them. I can't pretend that they can go away. So diplomatic recognition will be the price that will be ultimately conferred upon them. Now see what the Americans did. It is Afghan money lying in American reserve. To take that money away and distribute it for 9/11 when these poor wretched people had nothing to do. You think that this is the best way of winning favor with the Taliban? I mean, I am bewildered by what happens in Washington. Any one of us did that, they would say we stole their money. But the Americans can steal billions of dollars, which these people desperately need, and passing it on after 20 years, 21 years to victims of 9/11. So I think this is my answer to the first point about India being a geopolitical actor. India has a relationship with the region that goes back 5,000 years, uninterrupted relationship. Every part of the Arabian Peninsula has remains of Indian civilization. Every part. The more archaeological activities, as a result of these interactions that go back, both the land, the old Silk Route and the maritime connection, the spice route, the more you go back, the more you find how our ethos was shared. Our ethos was shared because I joke with people that when you are sitting in this dhow and you are stuck with each other for 9 months, you start talking about each other. You talk about the wife you left behind and the girlfriend in the next port. And then you joke with each other and you tell stories about the things. And that is how you have the shared stories. My Panchatantra and the Alibaba and the Arabian Nights have very similar stories. All of these stories have come from shared engagement. There is evidence that Indian mathematicians were there in Sumeria and in Egypt. All of this is well. This is an uninterrupted relationship. It had nothing to do with faith. Many of my merchants who lived in Oman and in along the coast of the Gulf on both sides were very often Baniyar. They were Baniyar, they were from Kutch. They were not Muslim. We've never had, our relationship has been religion neutral. You had Arabs visiting Malabar going back 1,000 years before Islam. So that when they accepted the message of Islam, they conveyed this message to the people of southern India. Southern India, there is no evidence that anybody converted to Islam because of force, because of politics. They converted through personal conviction. There are many stories about this. If you go to Oman, in Salalah, there is the grave of a Hindu ruler who heard about the message of the Prophet, went to Hijaz, and participated in the last Hajj of the Holy Prophet, and was converted to Islam by the Holy Prophet personally, came back, fell ill, was looked after by the people of Salalah, and he passed away there. His grave is there to this day. What did he gift the people of Salalah for taking care of him? The coconut seed. The Salalah coast is the only coast that has got the coconut. Extraordinary connectivity. Look, and when I went to Salalah, I thought I was in some part of India because it looked so much like Malabar. Now, this is the kind of links we have had. And I can go on. I have a whole presentation of 20, 30 slides on this subject of India-Gulf connection. So let us be very clear. When we say geopolitical connection, I am not talking about armed forces. From the time the British dominated the Gulf, it was the domination from British India. You know that. Indian armed forces were involved in the Afghan wars and in the war of Mesopotamia and in the Second World War as well. If you go through Iraq, you see the graves of Indian soldiers all across. Indian soldiers were involved in El Alamein. If you go to El Alamein today, you will see 1/3 of the graves are Indian soldiers. So we have had that kind of relationship. But after independence, I would argue to you, we went back to the relationship before the British. And what was that relationship? Economic, social, and cultural. Talking to each other, talking about faith, talking about philosophy, talking about folklore, and all that. So we have that. Today, what do I have in the region? I have extraordinary goodwill. It's a goodwill that was nurtured by our leaders, by Jawaharlal Nehru, Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, and most recently by Dr. Manmohan Singh and by Mr. Narendra Modi. The strategic partnership that we acquired was in 2010. And there is a history to that, why our partnership went from strategic energy partnership in 2006 to strategic partnership. And that has blossomed today. As I'm talking to you, there is five Indian Navy ships are exercising with five ships of the Saudi Navy. Today, as I'm talking to you, we've done naval exercises with UAE. We have done naval exercise. We have a special relationship with Oman. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a diplomatic initiative. So this word, geopolitical actor, is not the correct word I would use. I would use the word diplomatic actor. And I bring extraordinary capacity and strength to the table. Because of the goodwill, we are non-hegemonic, non-intrusive, non-prescriptive. Nobody can ever say that we intrude upon them and tell them what kind of ties, what kind of political order you need to have at home. That is something your leaders have the wisdom. They will sort it out with their own people in their own good times. So this is what I'm talking about. So please don't bring, now look at the positives. Look at the relationship, energy. Can any country in the world survive without energy? Not at all. If I have growth rates and I'm looking at 6% or 8% or 10%, I need that energy. And the only place, everyone has talked about diversification of energy, but everything that I have seen is I'm getting 80% of my energy from the Gulf. The GCC gives me 50% and then Iran and Iraq. 75 to 80%, 50% of my gas is coming from Qatar. As you well know, it was the first contract that we signed. So we have that. Trade. You know that Jabal Ali sends 50% of what I export to Iran, to UAE, 50% goes to Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, East Africa, South Africa, and West Africa. Indian merchants, Indian exporters are not in the picture. The UAE is exporting on our behalf, investment. UAE has talked about 70%. Saudi Arabia has talked about 100%. These are conversations between the corporate sector. We diplomats and politicians prepare the ground and prepare the basis. Corporate sector then takes over and talks to each other. We get out of the way. If they need some help from us, some agreement, some understanding, some relaxation, we are willing to consider that. And I think that has happened, as you are aware. So I would say that the strength we bring to the table, the credibility, if I may use the word, the credibility that India brings to the table. And if India were to participate with, say, Japan or Korea or China, look at the strength these four Asian countries bring to you. When we engage with you cooperatively and talk about the need for stability and need for security that is shared across the region. So I would say, instead of confrontational approach to collective security, I have a broad message of indivisible security. And this is where we will go forward. The last question put to me was about Turkey. If anyone has understood Turkish foreign policy, is a genius. Because I'm not sure that I have attempted to understand. I have desperately, I tried, I am still trying. I read as much as I can. I had anchored my understanding of Turkey's foreign policy in Neo-Ottomanism. Neo-Ottomanism indicated to me that here is a leader with a grand vision, anchored very deeply in the pre-Kemal Ataturk Turkey, the Turkey of Ottomans at their peak. He wants to engage with Caucasus, West Asia, East Mediterranean, and North Africa. Just like so, whenever I talk about this subject, I put two maps on the table, on my slide. The Ottomans at their peak, and below that where Erdogan has gone. Erdogan has gone to Iraq, military, Iraq, Syria, and Libya. He has gone to Qatar. There is a presence in Qatar. He has also gone, he has involved himself with Azerbaijan and Armenia. And he's talking about that corridor. So you have that. And then suddenly I see some months ago, Brother Erdogan is not talking about Ottomanism at all. He's talking about strategic autonomy. So he's now abandoned this. And I am looking at I wrote an article on Turkey's foreign policy, and I said how Turkey is coping with the challenge of Ukraine. And I suggested that the outreach to West Asia, a very strong, and UAE sent the national security advisor, followed by the crown prince, and then President Erdogan visited UAE just now. The engagement which is happening with Saudi Arabia is already occurring. Turkey is talking to Russia with regard to Libya, and some murky happenings in Libya may be corrected. And we don't know about the East Mediterranean. The earlier posture was very aggressive, but we don't see evidence of that just now. There is a talk of cooperation. He reached out to Israel. You see, he is the guy who was hostile to Israel under Ottomanism, and now he is talking to it. So the only point I would say is that he has done all this because he is preparing for the challenges Turkey is going to face, depending on the outcome of the Ukraine. My understanding is as follows. Turkey is watching with concern that Russia may take control of large parts of eastern Ukraine and has already taken Crimea, Mariupol, and may take, and already Odessa is blocked. Therefore, the result is Ukraine is today a landlocked country. This rubbish that we are reading every day has no relation with reality. Ukraine's armed forces have been smashed. They don't exist anymore. There is no command and control of the Ukrainian armed forces. What you find are isolated units. When you look at the TV, you will see 3 boys here, 3 boys there, and a massive rush of billions of dollars. The American strategic game plan is more important and interesting. The Americans want to anchor their hegemony, global hegemony, or Pax Americana, in Europe, and therefore want to bring Europe as a collectivity under their control. Otherwise, absent NATO, America becomes Fortress America, cut off from this and sitting quietly beyond the Atlantic. To be a global role player, United States needs NATO, needs an expanded NATO. And what they have got is not expansion to Ukraine and Georgia, which are impossible. It's not going to happen. Finland and the 2 people who had stayed back, Sweden and Finland, they have been bullied and bamboozled to make the most idiotic decision they could have made is to join NATO. If they join that, and I pointed out to a Swedish diplomat a few days ago that you are buying permanent Russian hostility while sharing a border of 1,300 kilometers with the Russians. These Americans have one capacity you don't have. They pack and run. Every time the situation is not to their advantage, they pack their bags and run so fast you can't see them. They did that in Afghanistan, Vietnam. They did that in Afghanistan. They've done that in Iraq. They have done that in Libya. So you have a very, very bad scenario. So the uncertainties, if NATO expands, now if you were to sit in Ankara, you have both problems. That's why you needed to clean up West Asia. You have 2 problems. Number 1, a strong Russia at your border, a completely depleted and debilitated Ukraine. Black Sea is today under Russian control. This is the problem. But at the same time, for Turkey, the expanded NATO, again, now they are subject to American pressure. In this problem, how do you hold your own? So Turkey's first reaction has been to oppose the entry of Finland and Sweden. That is their first reaction, but we will watch.
Allow me, before we conclude, I have a small really question. I had a big one. Now I really would like to conclude with a focus back on India, because you mentioned in the talk a very interesting really pattern in foreign policy. You mentioned in passing the legacy of NAM that has not been picked up on. You mentioned the sort of really frustration that the relationship with Iran didn't move forward. I mean, such sort of dynamics in foreign policy might have been captured or really caused by some form of inertia, which we know happens. And you did really mention that what India now needs is a new injection of, or an injection of new ideas into its strategic culture and the narrative and all that. Now, the comment or the question that I have is that we did see a change in government between the two big parties in India. People who think of shocks might say that that might have really sufficed as a shock, meaning something to jolt foreign policy out of its own inertia, which didn't happen, as you mentioned. We see a transition from one order to the other. No change happened. Ideas, as you mentioned, might be the culprits, meaning there is sort of stability in the set of ideas that govern the behavior of both parties. So if you're saying that we need something to change, where would that come from? Where would the catalyst or
you had mentioned that there were two changes in India. One was SARC. What was the other one?
NAM.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned that there's this legacy of goodwill that you were really commenting might be used as a way forward. So,
I'm going to speak frankly, as I always do.
Please.
The issue first of NAM. NAM has now become strategic autonomy. So NAM, in terms of terminology, is now called strategic autonomy. In between, we were fooling around with the term multipluralism. But multipluralism is a bit of a mouthful. So instead of using multipluralism, we are saying strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy has the advantage of vagueness, that you can take a decision on a major issue from the perspective of your own interest. I think that there was a short period when it felt as if we had abandoned strategic autonomy and had gone along with the American camp. I was a skeptic. I have argued India is too large, too old, too diverse, too chaotic to be anybody's partner, to be anybody's strategic ally. And certainly not the American strategic ally, because the Americans don't have equal partners. Everyone is a subordinate. You do the American bidding. And Americans act on the basis of their own interest, nobody else's. So that was the one that I had in mind when I was concerned about that India had gone too far. The peak was reached in 2019 when India helped to elevate Quad from middle official level to minister level. That was to my mind. And I have argued in a paper that the Chinese response to this was to provide the troops at Ladakh. There are many, my Chinese colleagues, my Chinese experts, China experts don't agree with me. And they talk of China's long-term plan to dominate, hegemony, etc. I don't buy that. I said to myself, China is too serious and important a matter to be left to China experts. You need other minds applied to this as well. With regard to SARC, you see, SARC is very much an integral part of Indian domestic politics. What you should really note is that it is Indian domestic politics that is today primary. The principal concern of the government is the domestic agenda, not the foreign policy agenda. This is my view, and I know that people sitting in South Bloc will disagree with me. This is my personal view, that overturning the idea of India and creating a new idea of India, which is narrower, more exclusive, more aggressive, is the principal agenda of the nation, of the leadership. In this scenario, hostility to Pakistan has now become an integral part of the domestic agenda. Now, when the Prime Minister came in, the first thing he did was to reach out to Pakistan. And then we had the Terrorist Act, and from that day, 2016 till today, we have not done that. And issues which have aggravated our relationship, besides the breakdown and the cross-border terror and the retaliation carried out by India, which again is part of the domestic scenario, the changes with regard to Jammu and Kashmir. I would argue to you that those changes are largely of a domestic character. But obviously, when you have a high-profile issue on the international agenda from 1947-48, it is a domestic issue, but it is likely to have ramifications elsewhere beyond our borders. And certainly Pakistan will try to say. I wrote an article in the Arab News at that time saying that this is a domestic issue and has nothing to do with whatever the constitutional changes that were done. There have been some debate in India also with regard to that. So I would say to you, and I'm saying this now with a high degree of caution, that we need to have a foreign policy approach that is equally important as the domestic approach. That means the domestic scenario and the foreign policy scenario have to feed each other. They should not be separate. I see, when I look back at the foreign policy approach, I see that a lot of activity of the Prime Minister, and he did very well during that period, had no larger integrated vision. You see, the Prime Minister leads or signals, symbolizes, but then you have to do a lot of work to carry it forward. A tripartite meeting you have at Tehran to pursue Chabahar and the connectivity, and then you don't do anything at all for the next 3-4 years, that is not diplomacy. And that is not, it's a failure. So to my mind, the first thing I would say is, number one, India's domestic and foreign policy should be given equal importance by the leadership. Number two, India can be a significant role player in world affairs only if its domestic house is in order.
And
You must
that
have robust domestic house in order. Number three, you must have domestic capacities which are very well built and which are within your capacity. And the fourth thing you do is build up alliances. So this is what I would say should be the approach. And you cannot have an uneven balance in favor of the domestic agenda and completely ignore what is happening, except insofar as they feed into your domestic agenda. So I support the policy relating to strategic autonomy. I support the downgradation of Quad. I believe that the most important relationship India has, which needs to address straight away, is with China. I think the route forward is with regard to reviving the RIC and conveying quietly and confidently that signal, if they got in Beijing, that India is in the American embrace, that is wrong. And there has been a significant course. I think the message, when Putin visited India in December last year, I think this message was conveyed, which is what led to the visit of Wang Yi in March, just now, 2 months ago. So I think course correction is happening. I think India should go back and revitalize BRICS and should become a more active role player in Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Absolutely. All those are grand ambitions that, as you said, really require mobilization by the leadership and also a technical staff to see them through. Professor Ahmad, it's been a pleasure. I'm afraid that we're out of time, but the discussion with you is always really fascinating and broad. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies and also at the Doha Institute. We welcome you maybe to have another opportunity to share with us your ideas and your expertise. I would like to thank you. I would like to thank your the audience. Please, the last word is for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Talmiz. I highly appreciate the very, very detailed lecture, and we hope that we follow up with you shortly on